Welcome everybody to the webinar. I'm Cameron Morley, the Head of Public Library Services here at the State Library of New South Wales. And we are here at the State Library on Gadigal land. I acknowledge the Gadigal people, elders past and present, and also the custodians of the lands on whatever land you are attending this webinar from. So today we're going to hear from Macquarie University, a few different speakers, and also, I guess the topic, the digital future of multicultural collections and services, is the result of a research project where we've partnered with Macquarie University. I guess from our perspective, multicultural collections are probably always going to be a hybrid of printed hard copy and digital, but we were really focused on the digital side of it, which is, I guess, a growing area for this particular project. So I'll hand it on over to Alice Chick, who is the principal research partner at Macquarie on this, and Alice will take us through the first session. So over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cameron. So let me just share a screen. And here we go. Okay, are we all good? We're seeing this next slide, sorry.
Yep, looks good, Alice.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Before we get started, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wallumattagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and custom have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and futures. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are really excited to share with you the work that we have been doing and the thinking that emerged from a massive amount of data. So today, Mark, Yan Lewis, and I will share our finding, but we also wanted to thank Dr. Crystal Lee and Dr. Sishan Liu for their fabulous support. When we think about the digital future, there is a tendency to think of a seamless flow from a physical to a digital transition. So instead of a print copy, I just open my phone or tablet to read an ebook. Okay? Just like these pictures, the book flows effortlessly into the digital format. Now, the questions that we have from this project is like, do we envision only one direction for digital transition as a one-way or is a two-way flow? At the start of the pandemic, we have heard about digital future as the best, if not the only way forward. But now we are hearing print books and print books are still holding off competition to ebooks, but audiobooks are increasingly popular. In libraries, users are returning after COVID, and things are not exactly all digital or only digital. In the area of multicultural services provisioned, there are a lot of you will be very familiar with the 2018 document on benchmarking public library services to multicultural communities. There are 5 relevant areas, and I'm going to use the terms used in the document. So the 5 areas are, first, planning for library services relevant to non-English speaking background client. 2, organizational capacity to develop and deliver multicultural services and collections. 3, quality of multicultural services and collections. 4, promotions and delivery. And finally, the evaluation. In this presentation, we are especially using the descriptor in areas 2, 3, and 4 to rethink the meaning of digital futures of multicultural collections and services. Okay. However, our team would like to emphasize that we are not going to do number crunching in this particular presentation. Instead, we would like to frame our discussion with Professors Rudin Sims Bishop's 1990 keynote address at the California State University Reading Conference, using the concept of windows and mirrors to think about digital futures. Right? So with the concept of windows and mirrors in children's book that has been adopted extensively to discuss multiculturalism, the original title of the keynote address was Windows and Mirrors, Children's Books and Parallel Cultures. Okay. As quoted, books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author, when lighting conditions are just right. However, a window can also be a mirror, reflecting back for us the joys and sorrows, the loves and hate, the pains and the pleasures of living. Now, this is a really, really powerful metaphor, and it has been used by a lot of children's books researchers to analyze the number of culturally diverse characters in children's book and argue for the inclusion for more culturally diverse character. Educators and librarians use the mirrors, windows, and sliding doors metaphor to rethink and tally the children's book they put in school libraries and use in the classrooms or in the public libraries. The principles of inclusiveness is probably very familiar to many children's librarians. Now, when we think about mirrors, we are talking about books that we can see ourselves in. And windows, we're talking about seeing others, people's and others' cultures. And the sliding doors, we're looking at the engagement. Okay. So now let's extend and expand the simple but elegant framework to multicultural collection and services. We would like to view multicultural collections and services as mirrors and windows to see public libraries as spaces of and for cultural awareness and awareness. Okay? So there is the awareness and the locations there. The concept of awareness as in place is borrowed from Professor Sir Nigel Firth, a human geographer, among other important academic appointments, on conceptualizing the transitions and representations of information and technology and space. So in conversations with Cameron and his team, we discussed the rapidly changes in our cultural and linguistic diversity in New South Wales, and really have to thank Oriana for her mentoring and inspiration. And the question that we ask is, how do public libraries accommodate to the changes to make our communities united, strong, and successful? So that was the phase one thinking, that we were using 2016 and 2021 census data to shortlist library network in highly diverse or diversifying areas. And we consulted with the state library staff, and we sent out a lot of invitations, and we are extremely grateful that the Liverpool City Libraries, the Blacktown City Libraries, the Central Northern Regional Libraries, and the Campbelltown City Libraries have all jumped on board and accepted the invitation. For each library network, we use census data to look at the demographic changes. And we have on-site visits to look at the spatial distributions and the visibility of languages and cultures. And then we check out the website, the pathway to how to get, for example, from Google search to the library catalog and library websites there, and the readability of web pages. And then we also look at the digital resources, the accessibility from different reading apps. And we also have interviewed with librarians and library users. Okay, so the question is, what kinds of digital futures are we looking at? We'll start with going to the library. Okay, so we're particularly looking at the Blacktown City Libraries and the Central to Northern Regional Libraries. So, first of all, we'd like to invite Professor Jan Louis Kruger to present this part.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, so I'm going to very briefly just give an overview of our findings in the two specific reports. And the focus here, as Alice already said, is really on analyzing the website pathways. In other words, how easily can people locate and find and get to the relevant resources, and specifically the catalogs and specific items that they're looking for. And then we also looked very at a higher level at the readability. In other words, how accessible is the language that is used on the various websites that users encounter when they try to find information on these library websites. Now, I must first of all, I must say that we are aware that the content on the web pages are very often embedded in council websites and not necessarily the responsibility of the different libraries. But these are the pages that the users then encounter. So in terms of the Blacktown Library in particular, we found that in terms of accessibility to people with languages other than English, so our local communities, in most cases, Google Translate is available, not on all of the options, but it is available, although it's not always easy to find, and especially for users who cannot read English or have limited English. And this is kind of a pervasive thing. We tend to basically resort to Google searches. Many users resort to Google searches when they try to locate the catalog or the library website, and you can do that if you do it in English. But it becomes a little bit more complicated when you try to do it in languages other than English, and you get more irrelevant hits, you could say. The language options in some of the sections of the library website, that there are language options in various parts of the library website. Not always easy to locate, but again, these are such different pages that it's very difficult to have something uniform for that. And then there's also varying availability of language options in the different digital collections, which is, of course, relevant to this particular project. In terms of readability, this is maybe worth pointing out that Google search, the readability in terms of reading ease. Now, we use three main measures. One is the Flesch-Kincaid reading ease measure, and there you can see that's the graph on the left. Most of the web pages, most of the content is in the mid-range in terms of readability. If we look at the grade level, in other words, how many years of schooling people require, then you can see that the grade level is fairly low. So people you need around 8 to 10 years of schooling to be able to process the text, but this is really only applicable to first language users of English, which is why we have the third part of the graph, and that is the Cometrics L2 or second language readability score. And that's quite alarming in that about 80% of the content is deemed as being of low readability for second language users. Now, this is not something that we typically think about when we construct web pages, especially in Australia, but it is a very important factor when we look at access. When we turn to the other libraries, and then specifically the Tamworth Regional, which is located on the Tamworth Regional Council web pages, we found in terms of the pathways that some of the options, that there are some options on the search for different languages, but not on the advanced search. That's maybe worth noting. And again, there's varying availability of language options in the different digital collections, and very often users require many clicks to get to the area that they need. In terms of the readability of these pages, again, you can see in the Flesch reading ease, Majority are in the mid-range. You can see Flesch Kincaid grade level, it's kind of between mid and high readability in terms of the grade level. But then again, in terms of the co-metrics, second language readability, about 70% of the content is not really accessible or has low readability for second language users. So I think that's about all I need to say here, Alice.
Okay, so now then we go into the library for on-site visit. Then it's a very different atmospheres, and also the kind of welcoming is not being the same as the online inaccessibility there. So for example, with the Black Town Cities libraries, that all visitors are welcomed with a really multilingual sign on your left there. Like, we can also use it as kind of a mirror, that it's almost like a fun game of finding your own language and adding to it. And then with the central northern regional libraries in Tamworth, that we also have the window, kind of like a display of book in your language, that there were about 40 books from different cultures and different languages, that those are really welcoming way to kind of understanding that this is a multicultural space, this is a multilingual space there. And when we look at the digital resources, that there is an ever-changing space, which is really exciting. Now, we put up a number of the logo for the resources available for a lot of the libraries. Not all libraries have the same set of digital resources, except for IndieRead. And there are many positive aspects of looking at the digital resources. Like, first of all, that there is a growing list of language other than English items. That is really, really fantastic. And it's also 24/7 access. So 11 o'clock at night, I want to read a book, and then, or listen to an audiobooks, I can do that. And there are a lot of multimedia resources. For example, there are a lot of audiobooks, and we also have documentaries, and we have movies, TV shows, for example, on Canopies and Beamer Films there. And we absolutely love the librarian curated collections over here. This is an example from Libby that we can click on the community languages, and there will be different list of curated items. Okay, so that's the really positive aspect of it. And then Professor Mark Orlando will talk a little bit about what the librarians and the users are saying.
Thank you, Alice, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of those findings. We cannot really, as Alice said, go too deep into revealing the findings, but so in our interviews and discussions with users and librarians on the use of digital versus print, what came quite clearly from the discussions is that there seemed to be a tension between the two. The use of apps can create, of course, great access, as Alice just put it, but there are also issues relating to that. Apps are not all very good in all the languages. Being from a French background, as you can probably hear, I can tell you that some apps with French are really good and very accessible and in all formats, but it's not the case in all languages. Generally, for European languages, for Chinese, that's good and sometimes very good. Other languages, if you think Urdu, if you think Hindi, that's not always as good. So that's one of the tensions. The media, the format is not always as good as well from one language to another. Budget issues have been definitely pointed out. Apps come generally offering a sort of pricing package, which can be a little bit too expensive or too high for some users. So all this has to be taken into account when we look at that concept as well of, as Alice framed it originally, looking at windows and mirrors. And so when you try to see digital versus print in that specific case, we have to take this into account. Now, if we look on the next slide at, so the two next slide, the two different types of libraries. So at the metropolitan level, what has definitely emerged from our discussions and our interviews is the fact that librarians have a very clear picture of the changing demographic diversity in their area, and also they're very aware of the generational changes, if you want, and they try to clearly make the multicultural collections very visible, and we've seen that clearly as well there in all sorts of formats, and that exposure of all these different collections in different languages definitely reflect the diversity of the users as well in that area. However, but we've also noted that sometimes to promote even more multiculturalism to communities who do not necessarily speak a specific language, they use, as you can see on the picture here, movable stacks, which in this specific case, you can see literature, books, and resources in Tamil. And again, even if it's not necessarily the language spoken and understood by the users, that's a good window, that's a good exposure to other realities, other cultures, other languages to the user. So that's one of the interesting findings that we can have here. Some of the data we got as well, and I will say that in a sort of broad way, clearly shows that there is a shift, or there has been a shift in the last few years from more European languages and cultures to South Asian and Asian languages communities. There's also a shift somehow in the demographic, as we said, long-term residents and a lot of newly arrived residents as well. And we talked about the collections. The library we talked about has also always seen as a welcoming zone as well for populations from a migrant background and refugee background. And this is definitely evidenced through the diversity, through the different languages other than English collections, to the fact that libraries are offering multicultural services in some ways, but also are free and are seen as free and safe spaces for the community. So these are the findings mainly for the metropolitan area. And if we move to the next slide, which is for the regional area, and in this case, so the Tamworth Council areas or libraries, what was clearly evidenced in our discussions there was the rapid population growth and change as well again in the population. And this is mirroring, if you want, the changes and the diverse ranges of industries in the region, from meat packing factories to medical facilities. That has an impact, of course, of who is drawn to these areas and lives in these areas. So there are different pockets of different communities. Our data also interestingly showed that the data we have from the census 2021 is not as accurate as could be, and probably because of the constraints due to COVID in 2021. And the reason we say that is that our data shows that many of the commonly used languages and language groups have fewer than 500 users in these areas. So also that many of the migrants have arrived in the last 10 years. So that creates, of course, different needs and a large diversity of needs. And that's what librarians have also pointed out there. They have to cater for a large range of needs, from the use of resources and books for more leisure, or something that goes to English learning resources. So that's quite varied. What varies as well is the language proficiency and the educational level of the users, which has an impact on the way they use digital tools, obviously. If their digital literacy specifically in a second language is not high enough, they definitely have expressed troubles in using the digital apps. They're also unfamiliar with the formats for some of them, and there is an implicit cost as well in downloading the apps and in using the apps. I mentioned before the pricing packages and things like that. That can definitely be something to take note of. Interestingly as well, we can mention that in the case of the library, in the photo you can see here, the library is used as a third space through the hosting of Multicultural Tamworth, which is a non-profit multicultural organization. And that created a space where, of course, users and library users from different backgrounds can make connections, can come together. That can be, of course, around the idea of books and reading, but simply as well of meeting people from different backgrounds. And that, again, if we frame this in the concept presented originally by Alice, is a very good example of what a sliding door can be, engaging with other cultures, and in this case, definitely highlighting the multicultural role that such spaces and such libraries can play. So we'll stop here because we don't have much time, and I'll give it back to the floor back to Alice. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. And we just want to stress that the pricing, the library user, I think is more about the data management there. The downloading there is, of course, is free to the library user. So the next phase that we're still thinking about what kinds of digital futures, and then there will be a large scale surveys, and also we would like to invite interviews with different librarians and experts on their thoughts on the grounds there. And we'll have the final report and the toolkits later this year's or early next year's. And to come back to this point, it's like we have been arguing that instead of just thinking about the print or digital resources, that we would like to think about whether the resources can be used as mirror or windows, or use it as sliding doors to engage and invite people there. So we're reframing multicultural collections and services as mirrors and windows to see public libraries as spaces of and for cultural awareness and awareness. Of course, the concept we talk about is borrowed from the professors Nigel Frith, human geographers, on conceptualizing the representation of information technology and space there. When a library members or a potential library members steps into a library, they are invited to a wonderful world of knowledge, cultures, and imagination. They're invited to see more of different cultures. They are through the windows of our multicultural collection and services, but they're also invited to feel included and safe when they see themselves through the reflections and mirrors of our collections and services. Now, through the windows, we feel included, to know that we are represented. And we also feel to become aware of others' cultures, and we rejoice in everyone's cultures. A digital future should and will ensure that the physical and digital spaces for multicultural collection and services are complementary to create a continuum of both online and offline cultural awareness and spatial awareness there. So we'll continue this conversation with more librarians and more library users, and we hope to hear more from you and your feedback in the coming months there. So we will leave the time at the end for Q&A. So, okay. So, then the next presentations, I'm just going to stop sharing first. The next presentations that we would like to invite the Wollongong City Library teams, the wonderful Faranak and Fenojot, to present their work on multicultural collections and services in the Wollongong City Libraries. Over to you.
Thanks, Alice. We're just going to quickly share our screen so that you can see. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction, Alice. So I'm Tanoja.
And I'm Faranak.
We're both from the Community Connections and Learning team at Wollongong City Library. So we are one of the case studies of today's language inclusion study. And today we want to talk about a concept, so a holistic approach to cultural inclusion at the libraries, which is similar to the concept that Alice mentioned about the two-way flow direction. But before we begin,
we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which our city Wollongong was built, the Aboriginal people of Darwell Country, and the traditional custodians of the lands of all the participants today. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and those emerging, and extend our acknowledgement and respect to all Aboriginal people who are present here today.
So our presentation, we've divided into 3 components. So first, we want to provide a quick summary of our involvement and findings from the language inclusion study. Then we'll explain what we mean by a holistic approach and the Wollongong City Library's model of inclusion. And finally, we'll give you some example projects and partnerships. This is to provide you first with the context of where we come in, what our city demographics are, how we are approaching the community needs as a service. And just a disclaimer, I know this seminar is about the digital future. What we are going to do is we are going to go into a broader context to see where does digital fit in and what do we do to supplement our digital resources. So as Alice and the team had explained, so Wollongong City Libraries was one of the several participants, and from the study we received 5 different recommendations. So one was, about the multilingual pathway. So having shorter clicks to our multicultural pages and content, also improving our in-language access to our in-language resources, also ensuring that our library documents and forms are in plain English and translatable using Google Translate. There were also some on-site suggestions as well, such as integrating our picture books with our general picture books and other spaces, including flyers and signage as well. And then a general comment about continuing professional development, such as offering cultural competency training and so on. And since the study, we did make some changes. So some of them were in direct response to the study, and others were part of our regular process for continuous improvement. So for example, in terms of our website, we've made some changes, such as including the Google Translate option, which was always available on our website, but it wasn't consistently on the same space. So we've moved it to a more prominent space and also consistently on each page. We've also revamped our entire website categories so that to make them more simple and group the information more clearly, such as preschool content is all under the preschool banner. Our language collections also we've updated since the study, so that included 400 plus called ebook resources on BorrowBox. We've also added 300 plus physical items per language that's in our collection. That's Chinese, Italian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. But that said, our work is ongoing, especially our website. There's still improvements to be made, especially in terms of translatability in plain English language. There are some challenges though, that's due to the fixed nature of the back end of the websites because of the Wollongong City Council, all web content is quite fixed. And also, this is like a comment, I guess, from our end as librarians working with the diverse community. So like all research, we also feel, there are some limitations to consider because there are some results that don't fully represent what our library service provides, which is totally understandable. The study, as Alice and team mentioned, they looked at more of the digital side, but we also wanted to showcase now today the broader context of inclusive practice and the importance of considering all these other factors when catering to the CALD community. And we know this is standard practice for all libraries. So what we're going to focus today is the Wollongong City Libraries angle. And we're very passionate about learning and sharing knowledge. So if you have, if you want to share what your libraries do, please share them in the chat or the Q&A or email us later on. So at Wollongong City Libraries, all of our programs, services and resources and everything is informed by our library strategy, and that got recently updated as well. And there are 4 key goals or components that we work from, which I've broadly put into the umbrella categories of social cohesion, lifelong learning, resources where digital would come in, and spaces. So digital resources contribute to reaching these objectives, but yeah, they're just a single component. So in order to establish the inclusive environment, we address these 4 components, and we also consider the multicultural service benchmarks, established by the State Library, which is implicitly included into their framework. So in order to provide the comprehensive understanding of how our libraries operate, Farinek's now going to talk about our current context that includes our demographics and the range of services offered. Sorry, it's just not going to the next page. Can you see the next page? There we are.
Yes. According to the census for Wollongong, we have Macedonian, Arabic, Italian, and others, as you can see in this slide, with the biggest populations. Despite this, certain communities, even though the population might not be as big, they have higher needs than others. So this includes emerging refugee communities. Some communities use our library services differently. For example, Arabic community has indicated more interest in magazines and children books. So that impact how we are going to serve those communities. Next slide, please.
Apologies, there's a lag.
In terms of the gaps that we notice in our community, these are gaps you might see in your own community as well. There is mental health literacy gaps, stigma and trauma, especially refugee communities. For example, in Arabic language, there isn't a word for counselor, so that's also a barrier there. Health literacy, being open to discussion of health. There are also language barriers, and some refugee communities have different literacy rate as well in their own language, like Burmese. There is also a technology gap, which is across the board, especially older generations and newly arrived migrants. This snapshot, quick context again, what do we actually do at Wollongong City Libraries? For our permanent collections, we've got Chinese, Italian, Spanish, and Vietnamese, and we supplement this with bulk loan in other languages. Our community engagement include consultation and running focus groups about our collections, events, and collaborative opportunities. We do lots of events and programs, which you see in the next slides. Flyers are available in different languages, and recently we created newly arrived to Australia information sheet. This will be in our website, which can also have the Google Translate option enabled. We have different literacy sessions like tech savvy in different languages and homework help sessions. Partnerships we have with many community organizations. We love opportunity to do outreach like universities, schools, and shopping centers. Here are some example photos that you can see some of our events that we've done. Multicultural March. We had Macedonian dance and Persian polymer clay workshop. Multicultural Health Week. We've got exercise, dance, and health recipe swap. Refugee Week, henna workshop at 3 different locations at libraries. Here, flu shot clinic by Multicultural Health Service. This is a collaboration and for refugee community as well. Be able to do over 60 people. Some photos from Tech Savvy program that many other libraries will also be part of. So here we've got a Spanish group, which have been meeting in that location for 40 years. And it was our first time going there and well connected to the community. We ran Tech Savvy session for 5 languages last year, and this year we are going to run in 8 different languages. Here is also talk about Rosemary Karaoke, about her book launch. Again, example of outreach where we are going to Chinese community, for example, to run some creative workshop with elderly. We had Culture Mix Festival. This was done last year, and also we continue this year. One day in October, we celebrate all local multicultural communities. This is done across several sites, but in the library, we had 11 multicultural workshops. puppet show, K-pop dance, sushi, taiko drumming, and so on. We showed you this event and different aspects just to show you this is what we are currently doing. They might not be actually highlighted in this study because the study focused mostly on digital aspects. And this different way that we've been doing, we are actually reaching out to the communities and engaging with them in different way.
So with that broad overview, I'm going to now talk you through 4 example projects that we've done to connect with our local communities. So there's a multicultural women's group called an Aboriginal Cultural Exchange, health literacy video campaign, that's a digital one, and a multicultural corner. So for the Multicultural Women's Group, last year, Warrawong Library received community feedback to begin a multicultural women's group. And what we did was we did some preliminary research on the existing groups and what are the gaps. And we found through our collaboration with organizations like MCCI and Women Illawarra, there is a need for social groups for CALD women, particularly non-seniors. And Warrawong, the area has seen an emerging refugee community and also an increasing number of CALD women experiencing domestic violence, unfortunately. So in partnership, we partnered with Women Illawarra and also Welcome Studio, and we launched a multicultural women's group. And this group offered social and wellbeing activities like painting in a therapeutic and trauma-informed and safe environment. We had a range of attendees, so from Iran, El Salvador, and Peru. And we've received from October 2023, we've run 25 sessions, and the feedback from the participants has been tremendously positive, as you can see with some example quotes here about women who felt isolated before coming to the library, but with the library and the sessions, they just felt they found a family. And so we really hope to grow this group even more. So another example of our engagement is called an Aboriginal Cultural Exchange, and this is an ongoing project. So the rationale behind this project was that the CALD community had a significant lack of opportunity especially to learn about and understand Indigenous culture and meet local and Aboriginal community members in a respectful and sharing environment. So this is something that's been identified as a sector issue for 5 years in Wollongong, and since the Voice referendum as well, this gap has been something that's been highlighted. So the library had collaborated with the council's community development team to provide newly arrived and isolated migrants a soft entry point to learn about the First Nations community's history and culture. And we've done this through a hands-on cultural workshops series. So far, we've done 3 workshops at Wollongong and Warrawong libraries. And the photos you see here are weaving workshops done for TAFE ESL groups, facilitated by the creator Amethyst Downing. This is another session that we've done for the refugee community, and you can see the men going headfirst into the weaving as well, which is lovely to see. This is photos from the painting workshop with the Multicultural Women's Group, facilitated by Auntie Narelle and Lorraine at Warrawong Library. Again, the outcomes, we've had overwhelmingly positive responses from all groups, and we've inserted an example survey here we've done in plain English, paper survey. This is from the weaving workshop, and you know, the reason we chose these creative workshops as a soft entry point was because creative workshops bypasses language barriers, and weaving, for example, is a common practice in many cultures, making it very easy to connect with Aboriginal culture. So for our next example, we have a health literacy video campaign. So this was done back in 2022, but this is an example where we did, the digital in tandem face workshops. And apologies, I think my screen just stopped sharing. So give me a moment, I will share again. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, no worries. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna show you a snippet of our video campaign.
ألا يشعرون بالخجل للتحدث عن مشاكلهم ومخاوفهم الصحية مع الأصدقاء، الأهل وطبيب العائلة.
Usa il test a domicilio per lo screening intestinale che arriva per posta per controllarti ogni 2 anni se hai un'età compresa tra 50 e 74 anni.
So, were you able to see the video?
We cannot see the video.
Oh, no worries. Let me just quickly stop sharing and share again. Apologies. I will share the screen now. New. Share.
Thật ra là sẽ đã số trả về community cái gì không nó qua làm mà cho mình đã hơi mình trả gì không nó qua gì hay là mà mình hút tê hay là mà đã hơi mình trả cô xóa gì tôi mình đã đi hip hop gì tôi mình đã cô xóa đi hip hop mình trả này tôi gì mà này cho mình thở là sự là yêu gì mà anh ấy có hết mình đã bị tập print mà bị bé.
So this is an example of our video campaign. So this was done as part of Multicultural Health Week in 2022, where the theme was cancer screening, and the project involved a series of 5 videos aimed at encouraging the CALD community members to prioritize their health and to seek assistance. And this was done in tandem with 5 also physical face-to-face information sessions as well. And because due to the cultural and language barriers, CALD communities have had lower participation rates in cancer screening programs that's led to poorer health outcomes. So we collaborated with the Multicultural Health Service and MCCI Refugee Support, and we videoed these film sessions with committee members, so in Arabic, Qurani, Swahili, in Spanish, and so on. So in the next slide, we have a list of our videos here, which you can look up on YouTube if you type Wollongong City Libraries and Multicultural Health Week. So they were addressing key questions and the community members answering those. And here are some outcomes from the video campaign. So we've reached over 1,300 members through our videos, and we broadcasted them through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and also through the community leaders channels. So they send it through WhatsApp and WeChat, for example. And we've had very high ratings in terms of people's confidence about their knowledge about cancer and whether they would recommend cancer screening programs to other family members. And finally, we just want to talk quickly about our Multicultural Corner. And this is at Wollongong Library. So Wollongong Library sees the biggest range of language groups using our service, which necessitated a bigger and more prominent space. And this was also informed by our bulk loan statistics, individual requests and community engagement and discussion with local organisations. So I'd like to highlight that the language inclusion study recommendations for our part was talking about integrating spaces, also making multiculturalism more normalised, and we completely agree with that intent, which is normalisation. However, practically speaking, it's much easier for community members to find their language items and so on if it's in a designated space. We found, especially for Wollongong Library. So we've moved our language collections to a larger corner in the library for greater visibility and ease of access. And we've added multicultural decorations to make the space more inviting. So that includes Persian rug, cultural arts, and also photos of our refugee community. And since the creation of this corner, we've seen higher loan statistics. Also, there's been lots of positive verbal feedback from customers and customers and library staff. And above all, it's been so lovely to see refugee communities coming in and taking selfies because they're on the wall, their pictures on the walls. It's very lovely to see. So that's pretty much an overview of how Wollongong City Libraries approach inclusion. So we do in a kind of a broader approach, and we'd love to hear how other libraries are doing their inclusion. We know there's so many amazing projects and initiatives out there, so please do send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a lovely corner that I'd love to go and visit very, very soon there. Yes, thank you very much. And then we will have Joey Chung and on reading Australian literature in Chinese, a trove list project. There is a fascinating work by Joey.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Okay, let me share my screen with you guys. So, hello everyone, I'm Joey from Alia Multicultural, and today I'm going to give you a very quick run-through about the Trove List project that we are doing at the moment. Before we start, let's have a little fun game with everyone to set the scene. I hope you all know what this book called Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. So in the chat box, without going into the Google and search for it, how many languages has this book been translated into? I know librarian can be like very efficient in finding information from Google, but please, on top of your head, just have like a try and see how many languages this book has been translated into. Okay, I see the link. The chat is like coming in. Yep, that's good. I can't see it right now. I will have a look at it later. Okay, ready for the answer? Here is the answer. We have 18 languages this book has been translated into 18 languages, and a lot of them is actually the community languages that our community are using. Surprise, surprise. The only issue is, and that is the reason why we have this project, is how many Australian library owns a copy of the translated title? And unfortunately, only 4 translated version is in the Australian library. 3 of them is in National Library Australia, and only 1 is actually circulating among the circulation. It is the Turkish version. It is in the Hume Library. So this question set the scene of this project, the background information about this project. And which is like Australian literature, the translated version is not really well known by the public actually among ourselves. So it's some background story about this project. If you scan the QR code on the corner, that will bring you to the home of the Trove List. It's the Alia Multicultural website. We store all of our Trove lists in there, so you can have a look if you want to. So the reason why we create this project is I have a Chinese Bookstagram account, and among my little circle of like Bookstagrammer talking about books in Chinese, I realized that they are actually sharing Australian literature that translated into Chinese, and then they were sharing it, sharing their thought, and then like talk about it among themselves. And then I was like, I'm Australian, I can read Chinese, but I never know those books have been translated into Chinese. In case you wonder what book is that, it is the Wellmania Misadventures in the Search of Wellness by Bridget Denany. That is the first book that come into my attention that Australian literature has been translated into Chinese, and actually a lot of them are people out there reading it. And then it made me start to wonder if a librarian like me, who can like speak multiple languages, didn't know about the Australian literature has been translated into other languages, how can the other readers find it out? Okay, there's a chance that because I don't work in a public library, so I have not much, my knowledge about books translation is not that well by compared to the other public library librarian. But still, for a normal reader, how can they find out the book has been translated into other languages? When serving the diverse community, English is always their second, third, or fourth language. Some people may find it is easier and more comfortable to read in their own languages. Like, for example, for me, if I read a Chinese book, it is like 2 times faster than me reading an English novel, even though I'm fluent in both languages still. However, translated Australian literature isn't a norm in the library. It is not in the mainstream bookseller as well. So in that case, how can we raise the awareness of the translated Australian literature to the public? One day, I was searching for a book called I Want to Die, but I Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Park Se-hee. Apart from Google worrying my mental health status and give me the Beyond Blue website, I came across to this digital library of Korean literature. This is a legit website. It is not like dodgy website. If you want to have a look, you can scan the QR code at the corner, then you can go to this page directly. So this page is like has a collection of all the Korean literature that translated into other language. So it's not just English, it can be Chinese or any other language that can find, and then put together in a list. And then what is the best part of it? Overseas person like me or every one of you in here, if you sign up a membership with them, then you can borrow the ebook for them via Libby. So it's all free. You don't need to pay anything. You just need to sign up with them, and then you can get a chance to read the Korean literature translated in your own language that like you can, but not everyone knows Korean, but you can like read the translated version to like understand Korean languages. And that is the good way to promote Korean literature. And then that is the light bulb moment. Like, Korean can do something like this. Why can't we do it in Australia too? The only problem is without any major funding, government support, and numerous contracts with the vendor, we can't have something similar like the digital library of Korean literature. What is the silver lining of being a TAFE librarian? I'm very good at finding work around. So why don't we fully utilize the resources we have on our hand, which is Trove, our beloved Trove. Every one of us use Trove more or less. So that is why I think about maybe we should create a list of Trove list that collect what is the item, the Australian literature that translated into other languages. We like make it a list and then share. It is easier to share it. And then you may ask why I need to do a Trove list, because the Trove has tagging system already. If you search for a book and click on the tag, and then it will bring you all the other things. The only issue is the tagging system in Trove is not really friendly with the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean language. The CJK language is not really good with their tagging system. So that is why we create a Trove list. So I made some prototype and pitch the idea in Ali Multicultural, and then Alice has kindly jumped on board, and then we are down into the rabbit hole together. It is a very funny thing. We both speak Cantonese, and then we can read Chinese. That is why the Chinese list is our pilot list. And to be honest, it's very interesting and very fun to actually have a meeting with another colleague in Australia speaking our own mother tongue in Cantonese. It's very amazing. Anyway, back to it. So we decided to do the Chinese list first. So our pilot list is the Australian fiction, non-fiction, and then later on the the children picture books that translated into Chinese. So, okay, let me show you the list. So in here, this is the Alia Multicultural website, which is the home of our Trove list. So for now, we have the fiction, and then non-fiction, and then the picture books. When you click onto the link, then you can go to the page. Oops, sorry, I just need to. Oopsie. Yeah. So this is the Trove list we have created. So this is Australian children picture books translated into Chinese. And then here is a list of items. Our process is a bit manual handling. We need to find out what book has been translated into other language, which in this case is Chinese. Go to the Trove, find the record, put it in the list, and then we'll put in the information in here as well. So we put in the Chinese title, and then the romanization, and then the ISBN for reference. So Alice and I have two different approach. Alice is more systematic way. So she goes through the CBCA list and see which one is the award winner, and then try to look for the books and then put it into this list. On the other hand, I'm not traditional way of searching things. I like to go to the social media, to the book review site overseas, to the bookseller page. Latest addiction is going to the other public library like let's say the Korean one, to the Seoul Public Library to find information from there. In this kind of method, we'll find something that is like you never expected to be found. This is how I found out the yield by Tara June Winch actually translated into Chinese already, but it is not available. The information is not available in Trove and any other places. Okay, so now back to this one. So what is next? Alice and I found out that the children picture book is actually a huge market, and there's a lot of translated version, and it is easier for us to put them in the Trove list. That is why we are in the process of develop more Trove lists for the children's book. As you can see from the page just now, we have launched the Korean list already. There is over 100 items. We have more than 50 items in the French list and lots more coming. And we are seeking volunteers for this ongoing project. So please feel free to contact us if you are interested. If you have any suggestion, or you just want to fall into the rabbit hole and party with us in the rabbit hole, please email us. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us as well. And that's it for our presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joyce. And so we do have a meeting in Cantonese, but we can become more multilingual as well there, and we're doing serious work in Cantonese there. Yeah. And so it's actually a really, really interesting project of finding Australian literatures and children's literatures in different languages. And now I would like to hand over to the PACE student from Macquarie University. So our PACE project is actually for every undergrad student to have engagement with professionals, and also with the placement with community organizations there. So last semesters, we were very fortunate to have 4 amazing undergrad students. We have Cassie Dade and Maya Moat today presenting on behalf of the other 2 members, Nikki and Wendy's. So what they have worked on is to have a look at the physical space and collections in different libraries, and they're going to take a tour around Sydney. And Cassie and Myers, would you like to share screen now? And I'll hand over to you too.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Cassie and this is Maya. And we are going to take a kaleidoscopic view of the multicultural collections in Greater Sydney libraries. So before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wallamadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. Our presentation, Alice just gave a quick overview of our PACE project. We'll take a look at, very briefly, how we went about it. Then we'll look at the physical multicultural collections for the libraries we visited, which were Bankstown, Green Square, Hornsby and Parramatta. And then have a look at the digital collections and the library apps for Central Northern Regional Library and Liverpool City Library. So we were each tasked to visit our main library in our local government area to collect data. So that ended up being Bankstown Library and Knowledge Centre, Hornsby Library, Parramatta Library and Green Square. We also collected data online at the library websites and apps for Central Northern Regional Library and Liverpool City Library. And in our research, we found that BorrowBox, IndieReads, and Libby were the main apps that were used across the libraries.
Just before we started, we wanted to see where the multicultural collections were physically and who they served in the state. It was pretty cool to find that the locations of the collections matched up pretty well with population density and sort of the multicultural communities that live in the state.
Yeah, so now we wanted to go through what we found with the physical collections at the libraries we visited, mostly in terms of the multicultural collections and services. So the first thing that we noticed were these banners that were at almost all the libraries we visited, including the Central Northern Regional Library and Liverpool City Library that Alice visited and gave us some photos from. We thought these were a really helpful way to let library users know immediately on their way in that there would be resources available in different languages. We also thought it was really effective that the languages weren't just listed in English, they were listed in the relevant language. And additionally, at Bankstown, we saw this welcome banner that had different languages welcoming users in, and we thought this fostered inclusivity and made the library more inviting for library users who are using languages other than English. All the libraries that we visited had a really great range of multicultural services available. So these three photos just show some of the services we found. So the first one shows financial seminars in Mandarin at Hornsby Library. And the third one is also at Hornsby Library, showing some computer and tech training. And then in the middle, we have Polish Friendship Group at Bankstown Library. But we also saw services for seniors, we saw women's groups, Chinese dancing groups, and English conversation groups. Again, all the libraries that we visited had a really comprehensive collection of English learning resources, which included workbooks, guides, guides for taking common English tests to become certified in Australia, books, dictionaries, and more. We also found that most of the libraries had digital avenues for English learning as well, where they had free subscriptions to apps and websites. We thought this would be really helpful for multicultural library users, particularly for people moving to Australia who need to learn English for work or study. In terms of the spatial arrangements, finding the multicultural collections at different libraries was easier for some than others. We found that some were very easy to find, whereas some were a bit difficult because there was incorrect signage and a lack of labeling and some inconsistencies between the labeling of English collections versus multicultural collections. But we wanted to use Hornsby Library as an example of a great spatial arrangement where we found that the multicultural collections sat in between the magazines, the newspapers, and the children's section. And the circular layout of the materials ensured that none of the multicultural collection was secluded in corners or hard to find, and it really drew library users into the space. Something else we noticed was that none of the libraries had the multicultural collection identified on their directories next to the lift. So we thought that might be something that could help users find it a bit easier if they were looking for it. And something we thought was really great was when children's areas included multicultural children's resources. And we found that fostered inclusion for multicultural children, as they don't have to go to a whole different area to find their reading materials. And finally, as we can see in figure 9, labeling the languages in that relevant language rather than English was more effective and supported multicultural library users to find their collections. Something we really loved about the multicultural collections in the libraries was that there was a wide range of multimedia options to choose from, including books, DVDs, magazines, picture books, graphic novels, and more. We thought this range of media options was really impressive, and it communicated that the multicultural collection was up to date and constantly growing and improving. There was a great range of community information in languages other than English, as can be seen in these images here. We found information on child protection, drug and alcohol use, information about how to use public libraries, and more that we couldn't actually read because it was in other languages. But it was really impressive to see it in so many different languages. And we thought this was a great way to engage library users in safe practices within their community and personal lives, and that by coming into the physical space of the library, they have access to all this great information that they might not see anywhere else. And just a couple other noteworthy features we wanted to touch on was the inclusion of Auslan learning in the children's area, which is a great resource for all children. Parramatta Library included Braille on their directories to assist visually impaired users to navigate the space. And finally, it was great to see a First Nations collection at Parramatta Library and the Koori collection at Green Square. And while we didn't see a dedicated space for this at Hornsby or Bankstown, we did see local history and family history services at those libraries.
Okay, so I'm going to do the section on the digital apps and how we think they're accessed and used by library users. Next slide, please. So the positives of the apps is that, well, I'm sure Alice went over them earlier, that they greatly expand the multicultural collection that is accessible, and you can use them everywhere. There's 3 really common ones across all libraries. That's BorrowBox, Libby, and IndieReads. From my research, BorrowBox and Libby are international apps. They're used all over the world, I'm pretty sure. And IndieReads is very specifically Australian, and they focus on Australian books, I'm pretty sure. We found that most of the library websites contained user guides for the apps that were really good. They were PDFs, so there isn't any fiddly most websites, the change from laptop users to phone users is a really big problem, especially with information that's like very picture based. But in the PDF format, this isn't a problem. All the instructions were really clear and succinct, and there was a lot of pictures. Next. So we found that Libby's language settings are dependent on your phone's language settings. So the positive of this is that the language for the app itself can change, not just the materials that can be found on the app, but like the app itself. So it's
supports most iOS languages, so that's English, Spanish, French, Canadian, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, German, Italian, Japanese, and Russian, and Swedish. This is great for the accessibility for cold people, and it encourages them to adopt the app, especially if their phone is already in one of these languages. However, the collections that are available through Libby do seem to be at the discretion of individual libraries. So whether the resources themselves are in French or Chinese is up to the libraries themselves. Next slide. So with Indie Reads, we found that you can translate it within the app. So the app itself translates to Chinese, French, German, Italian, Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. I'll speed up. This variety of languages is quite Eurocentric, but not too bad compared to other apps. The multicultural collection itself is pretty Chinese, Spanish, Italian, and French focused. Also, throughout all three apps, the app interface itself is quite consistent. This encourages the use of multiple apps. So because the learning curve from one app to the other isn't very steep. Next slide. Sorry, Cassie. There are some negatives to apps, mostly that different libraries have different materials in different languages despite using the same app, and that's quite confusing. Notably, BorrowBox's resources available through BorrowBox for Liverpool Library were available in German, Irish, Latin, Spanish, and Welsh. However, for the Central Northern Regional Library, there were no language other than English resources available. And Indie Reads has this unique problem where wherever the app updates, you can't open the app anymore, and the only way to solve this problem is by deleting the app and then re-downloading and then re-logging in, which is fine for dedicated users, but anyone who is casually trying to use the app and casually trying to access its resources, this is really discouraging. So just sort of recount, the app format itself has a quite high barrier to entry. You have to download it, you have to update it, and also you have to carry it around on your phone. On the right, I have a screenshot here of my phone, and as you can see, like the last 4 apps are all just library apps, and they take up quite a bit of not just space, but like mental space and like space in your life. And that's that's a big ask for users. And also another downside is that to access resources in languages other than English, in most cases, advanced search has to be used, and that's just innately kind of a hard thing to do. And most available resources are pretty Eurocentric. So we have some possible future recommendations that may improve the usage of these apps. One is to request titles just in English and in non-English. Another is to increase the variety of language options that are available, particularly in languages that are most relevant to that community. This is already done to quite an extent, so we do understand that. I think the actual limitation is in what we can give as librarians. We also recommend user guides in languages other than English, much like the pamphlets that are already there for classes and such. We recommend user guides for the apps itself.
So just to conclude, we wanted to express that the digital collection is a great addition to libraries. However, it shouldn't replace the physical collection. The physical collections invite people into the library space where they can access important community information, services, and social connection, which was touched on earlier with the Wollongong libraries. And yeah, they're important places for literacy skills, story time, study spaces, and just one note on the apps is they're great for people who use common languages, but they're not as inviting for people that use less common languages because they're not available in the collections. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the seminar.
Oh, thank you, Cassie and Meyer. So that's their first public presentations there, so well done. And then finally, we have Dr. Sabine Little, Senior Lecturer in Language Education at the University of Sheffield, UK. Her work on the Multilingual Children's Library has won the International Brenda Eastwood Award for Diversity and Inclusion, awarded by the UK Literacy Association. And it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, of looking at multilingual children's library. So over to you, Sabine.
Thanks so much, Alice. I realised that going last kind of puts you in a position where you kind of wish you could refer to everything that everybody else has said. But anyway, I hope this is useful to you. So greetings from the virtual UK, I suppose. I've realised I've not actually had a starter slide to explain a bit about Sheffield to those who are unfamiliar. So Sheffield is it's the 4th largest city in the UK with 500,000 people living in it. It's in the north of England. There's about 150 languages spoken within Sheffield. And similar to here, I guess, the libraries are connected via the council. They share a single catalogue system. And the Multilingual Children's Library that I'll be talking about today was part of, or became part of, the main children's library in the city centre. So that may be by way of background. I'm wanting to talk a little bit about space and belonging and some underlying theories, because this was a research project that took place pre-COVID, actually, and then introduced the project a little bit and ideas for a more inclusive future of the library. The digital aspect that I'm talking about is mainly to do with cataloguing and things, because actually when I talk about space theory, especially for children and families, I think there were interesting balances to do with access versus the physical space, so access to digital resources versus having a physical space, that I'll be talking a little bit about. All the photos are from the Multilingual Children's Library. All illustrations that you come across are my little gift to you. There's a link at the very end for a free download. They were part of the research project and got created by a children's illustrator. So you'll be encountering those throughout the talk. So when I think about space in a library, I think about the physical space. What is allowed to take up space? What is the shelf space like? What is the footprint of different collections in a library? A temporal space, so stuff that takes up time, events, scheduled things that are happening. The digital space, we've heard a lot about the apps and library apps. I'm also interested in the cataloguing and how inclusive it is. Spoiler alert, in Sheffield or in the UK, it isn't. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that. And then the metaphorical space in terms of a sense of ownership and belonging. Whose space is it? Who does it belong to, and who belongs to the space? Those are the things that I'm going to try and whiz through in the next few minutes. So physical spaces are designed with users in mind, and we now know that design may overlook certain demographics, certain groups in society, and a lot of ideologies around space assume that space is occupied by either or groups rather than multiple groups, and not simultaneously. whereas a library obviously is an open space that can be used at any time by anybody. So in order for social justice to occur, there must be an openness for the space to be occupied. I've visited 2 libraries here so far, and I'll be visiting, I think, 2 more before I leave. So because I'm in Sydney at this particular moment in time, to learn from you, and I've been learning a lot already, and I'm very much appreciating that. There's the physical accessibility of the space in terms of where it is located. And of course, libraries are by default spaces designed with multiple users in mind, but the shelf space is naturally organized to benefit the maximum number of people. And when we looked at the Multilingual Children's Library, we tried to work out where and how that new space would fit into an existing physical space. But we were very clear, and I can see here you are ahead of us, that in the UK, until the pilot of this library, most multilingual children's or most multilingual collections were run by volunteers outside of the overall library space. So they were volunteer-run libraries, and there might have been half a shelf that would contain all bilingual picture books, but not really a designated physical space with different languages and enough languages to actually sustain borrowing patterns. So I realize that I'm very much teaching Granny to suck eggs here, but I'm hoping you're still finding interesting things here. In organising events, we worked with the heritage language organisations, and one of the things that I briefly wanted to mention, and I might say a little bit more about that later, when we ran multilingual events, they were multilingual. We didn't have, as part of this 15-month pilot, any event that was for a specific language community. They were all featuring multiple languages taking place in the same space on the same day. And I'll say a little bit more about that. The digital space, and both in terms of digital collections, but mainly with cataloguing. So we had issues with the technology used for cataloguing. It was resolutely monolingual. It would not accept any accents, diacritics, non-Romanized fonts or anything like that, which made it very, very tricky to work out how best to catalogue this collection. And it also meant that the catalogue was not very accessible to users. If you were trying to look for something and you were Polish, you had to try and work out how a non-Polish speaker might try to write the title of the book that you were looking for. So understanding the cataloguing system by users and librarians and how to use that for this new space became quite a challenge. The library served as a third space, and we've already heard third spaces mentioned, where people from different backgrounds can meet and find common ground. And this is why we wanted to create a multilingual space where the users were not the same. They spoke different languages, different family situations, socioeconomic backgrounds, but the language other than English and the desire for their language to occupy a public space is what occupied them. So the physical space here functioned as a metaphorical space, and importance was measured by the city centre location and the main library. So this was a case study of the main Sheffield City Centre Library, the Children's Library, which included, as part of the pilot, a new multilingual collection. We got data from borrowing figures, event evaluations, event observations, focus groups of parents, focus groups of library staff, and not from the planned questionnaire, which was there for 15 months and resulted in 3 responses. So we had to go out and find the data. The idea of just putting a questionnaire in the space and hoping it would get filled in didn't work particularly well for me. And then there was a thematic analysis focusing on what were the practical considerations and concerns and what were the emotional ones. One thing I wanted to say, and I don't know, I'm assuming the situation here is quite similar to the situation in England. We were trying to pull this off without any funds. So the library said, we can give you the space and we can give you the staff time. And I'm very much mindful that in the real world, that is very much funds, that is very much in kind and real money going into this, but they had no funds for the actual books. So we created a 550 books strong collection on the basis of donations from authors, illustrators, translators, publishers, heritage language schools, and individuals. We had a social media drive called Bring a Book Home, encouraging people when they went on holiday to buy a book at the airport and bring it home. So this is not a carefully curated collection. This is a grassroots initiative, despite being linked to the main library, on the basis of, can we make this happen? And I'm raising this partially to show how dire the funding situation was, but also that it actually meant that there was a lot of community buy-in. The community wanted to make this happen. 2 heritage language schools ran tiny community libraries on the basis of a little box of books that they would take to heritage language school on Saturday, and they decided to just donate their library, their box, to the main library, so that children could access those books on days outside of Saturday school and have it in a more open space. We also, because none of the librarians I was working with were multilingual, so we actually used social media help with identifying languages when we had donations come in, and the librarians weren't sure what they were or what the book was, and it wasn't something that could be found easily via ISBN. And all of this kind of meant that we created this community feel to it. This was very much a project that was owned by the local community, and that really helped. We ran multilingual storytelling events, and these always ran on the basis that we would have a full day and a story in a different language happening every half hour. We had multiple occasions where somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, I could do Persian. I'm here now. I can tell a story in Persian. So again, we had this community buy-in. That meant that it was very much something that the community could get behind. We had a multilingual readathon. There's a picture here on the top right. This was because a publisher got in touch with me and said, we're bringing out a bilingual picture book in 20 languages. Could you do something with that if we give you 1 copy of each language? And I went, yes, we're going to do a multilingual readathon. We managed, I think, 18 out of the 20 languages. So we basically read the same book again and again and again and again, with community buy-in. So again, it became a challenge to see how many languages we could find. We did a multilingual story writing event. And then the picture at the bottom there, which is one of my favorite pictures of Sheffield, as a multilingual city, where we created an outline of the city, and different people came and entered where they were living and wrote different bits in their language that they wanted to. So all the events that we ran were intent on bringing together normally separate communities. So if you were multilingual in whatever language, then all these events had something in it for you. We created a multilingual reading scheme. I've learned a little bit about your different reading schemes. In the UK, there is one summer reading scheme that happens every year on a different topic. It's very straightforward though. Read 6 books, any 6 books. When you return them to the library, you get a stamp and stickers, and at the end you get a medal and a certificate. And we shamelessly borrowed that approach because it's run for years and everybody's familiar with it. So we created a separate reading passport for multilingual reading specifically. We added a bit of a rating. We had a globe stamp for when books were coming back. And then we had, as part of the pilot, we had one big event with 400 children who received a medal and certificate. And then I left additional certificates in the main library for when children finished on an ongoing basis. One thing that was really, really interesting was that children became language curious. And you can't actually, well, you can see two of them. So you can see Spanish and Japanese. That child genuinely spoke Spanish and Japanese as part of their upbringing in their family. But there is a Spanish and German one on the right. And then the main one is mainly German with one odd French one. Children were becoming language curious and just for the heck of it would try a different language, which really was interesting for me to see that it opened up this idea of well, if I speak one language and it's here, then I might as well try another one and just see whether I can access it, which I thought was an interesting finding. So to come to findings, I will whiz through the borrowing figures, but there's one main point that I want to make. So these are the numbers that were available in each book. So you can see there you've got German, Spanish, French as the main books available. And a very much, if you just go down the list, you have to go down quite a way before you meet a non-European language. I think that is partially to do with the slightly different immigration history of the UK versus Australia. But again, bearing in mind, this was run on the basis of donations. This speaks to how accessible some of the languages were. It was much easier to get hold of languages, of books in certain languages than in others. And there are some here that I'm very, very proud of that we have them in the collection because they were really, really tricky to get hold of. Borrowing figures number 2. So these are the top 12 issues per language. So in the 15 months of the pilot, in total, 272 issues in Spanish were made. So not separate books. And I haven't done, because it would take me forever for this talk, the comparison of which book exactly got how many issues. But I've done 2 different figures. So here is how many issues per language. And again, you can see Spanish, French, and German and Dutch dominate, which is unsurprising because that's where we had the main number of books available. If you roll this up slightly differently, these are the top 12 issues per book. So there were 9 issues for Hungarian, but there were only 2 books in the library. So actually, on average, each book got taken out 4.5 times. Only 1 Scots Gaelic book, which got taken out 4 times. 15 Japanese books that got taken on average 3.6. You had 88 Spanish books, and each got taken out on average 3 times. So the reason why I rolled this up this way is that actually it shows a bit more about the need and the desire, and how different families were trying to make the languages work for them. So German was actually top of the list in terms of the books available, but doesn't appear at all here in terms of issues per book in the language. So that gives us a little bit more of a sort of counterplay in how borrowing figures might matter. But there is something that I want to say about borrowing figures that I'll come to a little bit more. And here it is. So the physical space. This was the main library, and I believe just as maybe the state library here in Sydney, it caters less, but also to people who live physically nearby, but also to people who make an actual trip, who are in the centre, either specifically for the library or to do other things. And then they visit the library as part of it. So for many, many people in Sheffield, this is not their main library, but it was where the books were. So families had to basically make a trip to go there. And from the families that we spoke to, people were saying, yes, they're going to do the shopping. And the library became a waiting space while one of the parents was going to do something else. But something that I found really crucial actually was linked to borrowing patterns. So from the librarian focus group, what came back was they could see that the stock was being used. So they use the library, they don't borrow the books. This area in particular seems to get a lot of use because it's always very messy, and messy in this case was a good thing because it indicated use. But we were trying to get to the bottom of why the families were not taking the books. And this came down to two things. One reason is given there. I knew my son would read it once, he wasn't going to read it again. So to me, it didn't make sense to check it out and take it away from another family who will use it. So there was a community thinking with comparatively few books available. Families didn't want to take it away, which meant it never got issued, which meant that in terms of standard library statistics and borrowing figures, it never appeared as something that was being used. So that's the first reason. The second reason, I think I've got a slide on it, but I will mention it now, was that families wanted their children to encounter their language in the physical space. And that was very much part of this idea of belonging. We had families volunteer to do the storytelling simply because they wanted their children to realize that their language was not just for the home. It was something that was spoken in the main library. And therefore, they didn't take the book home because they would have read other books at home, and they would read these books in the library to make that space a key part of their heritage journey, basically. The library made multilingualism visible, but the events made it audible. And because we mixed all the languages, it meant that we had English visitors who just happened to be in the library anyway, because it's a shared space, give feedback on events. And then families who would come for one language, but they stayed for others just because it was happening, and they might as well listen and see what they could understand. So again, children became more language aware, language curious. And across the 3 multilingual storytelling or reading events, children moved from being listeners to being the tellers and readers. We had children and families who came back again and again and again. And by the 3rd event, it was those children that chose to read to others. And that sense of agency to see was just absolutely fantastic. I'm conscious of time and I'm whizzing. Cataloguing was a real issue, and I've hinted at that. We did have access to volunteers, but these volunteers were not allowed to use the council computers on which the catalogue sat. And that was one of the most frustrating things. So cataloguing was slow. We had many more donations than ever made it onto the shelf due to the time pressures faced by librarians, who couldn't just quickly catalogue them, but had to battle with scripts, fonts, romanization, etc. And the volunteers that we found were not allowed to actually do the volunteering due to council rules, which was very frustrating. And the other issue I wanted to briefly mention, I'm sure it's the same here, that if you have a local library that is part of a wider network, you could theoretically order a book in from a different library, but our families didn't know that they could do this. And that greatly hampered the access to those books from families who lived elsewhere. And here is just a quick hint at this idea of there's a tiny group of Lithuanians in the city, but there is a section for it in the library, in the main city library, that makes you feel proud. It's not just at home. It means our language is important. We are important. And that came through from different, different people that I spoke to as part of the research. So thinking about space and the importance of space, the catalogue is a major issue. The multilingual library had a positive impact on identity and belonging, and that was something that was really important to me to find out as part of this study. If you would like to contact me, there is a paper that gives more details, basically the write-up of the whole study. There's a link here about where the artwork is available. I can put that in the chat, and my contact details are there for anybody who would like to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. And I think like we have very similar idea coming across, and that will be really good ongoing conversations about multilinguals, collections and space in the near futures there. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for all the presenters, and so now we're open to any questions, comments, and suggestions. Please put that in the chat. And so I think like Sam asked the questions about suppliers for dual-lingual no, not dual-lingual, dual language books. And so there is a list, for example, from Global Language Books, and there's also a list on Alia Multicultural website and Aussie Global Books. Okay, so any other questions, comments? And we just wanted to say that like next week we'll be sending out the recording and also a little booklet with information and kind of main takeaway from different presenters. Okay, so any data on the usage of multicultural collections of the libraries as part of the political pick viewed, and I think we will have to kind of get back to you on that, on the circulation information. That will be really interesting to know as well. Thank you, Helen. The question is noted. Any questions, comments, feedback?
I don't mind jumping in, Alice. Look, I would really encourage people who are looking to purchase books in certain languages. Certainly those lists that people have mentioned are available, but we can also help you at the State Library. We have a multicultural purchasing cooperative. The State Library buys books in many languages every year for the circulating collections that we send out to your libraries, but we can also buy those collections on your behalf. So, and that works really well if you pool your money with us, and we get bulk discounts in that way. So please contact our multicultural purchasing cooperative, depending on which languages that you're looking for, and we can help you. In terms of statistics, we do collect statistics every year from libraries about what books that they've got in certain languages. We have some circulation statistics, but we also have this very good circulation stats for our collections that we send around New South Wales. So I think this has been really inspirational, just sort of hearing all those different stories and looking at the research that so many different people have done. A lot of it resonated, and I actually learnt quite a bit as well, listening to what people's impressions are when they're walking into libraries, and then seeing that project in Sheffield, for example. So I would say that's probably going to inspire us a little bit at the State Library to maybe have a bit of a look at the data we've got, and maybe we can package that up and share it via the website, just to, I think, keep a bit of momentum happening. And once Alice and her team are ready to publish some of that research, including some of the really in-depth studies that they've done at those libraries, that should really inspire us as well as a network to look at the good practice and the sort of the way that some of the libraries have been doing things so well. So that's my comment here, and I'll get off screen now and give somebody else a chance to talk if they want to. Thank you. But thanks to the presenters, and thanks to everybody who attended. I think we got up to about 150, and of course it's been taped, recorded. So this webinar will be available for other library staff or general public, whoever, who missed it. So thank you.
Okay. So everybody, just one last call for any comment and questions there. And as we say that, we're going to share the recording. Yes, sorry, Mark.
Oh, not a problem, Alice. You could finish your sentence. Now, I just want to make a comment specifically directed at librarians and people who organize resources, specifically digital resources. We've heard a few times, and we've seen when we collected data in libraries, that librarians use a lot Google Translate or machine translation of from other companies. You know, my background, if you've read the bio, is that I'm more in translation and interpreting. I have a huge interest in multilingualism and multiculturalism, but I'm also very interested, and this is where I do my research, and most of my work as an educator is on training translators and interpreters, specifically using new technologies and digital technologies. My advice would be, I can understand because of the cost of using translators to provide translations that you know, librarians and public servants and others would turn to Google Translate or machine translation, but there's a risk in that, and we know this very, very much. When you work with what we call high resource languages, that is to say languages for which there are huge data sets, you know, online, in the cloud, of course the translations can be better because the way neural machine translation works is by using these data sets. But for some languages that we call low resources languages, where you do not have that much data in the data sets, the translations can be of really low quality. So my advice would be, when you use Google Translate or machine translation, to either have a professional proofreader and reviser, and there will be a cost to that, but that's probably better than having a translation that is so bad that the reputation and the visibility and reputation of the library would be at stake. Or maybe if you're in your users and in the communities of users that you have, if you have people who could have a look at the translations and tell you if they are appropriate, if they work, and if they're fine, maybe there could be a way. I think it's always important to flag that, yes, it's great to have machine translation for some tasks, but it is also important to be aware of the limitations and sometimes the risk in terms of reputation that you could have. So it's just a quick comment for people who are planning to develop more multilingual resources in their libraries as well.
Okay, so we have a question. What is the State Library preferred name for public library literacy collection? Is it Learning English? I think that will be a questions for you, Cameron, or others, State Library colleagues. And if we can,
yeah, look, I'm still here, Alice. I don't know that we've got a preferred term. I mean, they'll be called something different in every library, but I guess it's yeah, I guess we take that one on notice. Yeah.
At different libraries, we have seen Learning English or ESL, Learning Kids, that kind of names. Yep. I guess so if there's no questions at the moment, and we really welcome everybody to send us any informations and questions or comment later on, and we will be sharing the link for the recorded video and also the program booklet and the takeaway for today's discussions. So thank you again, Cameron, for making the arrangement.
Thanks, everyone.
For making this arrangement. Yep. Thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon. And yeah, thank you.